loud, mocking, and sharp enough to cut. A collapsed junk house and a single $10 bill. He sneered, tossing his head back as he looked at the official legal documents. You spent 5 years taking care of a broke old man, Katie, and all you got was a pile of garbage. The rest of my family joined in, their smug smiles burning into me. They had walked away with millions in pristine stocks and prime commercial real estate, leaving me with what they thought was insult and poverty. I didn't shed a single tear. I just quietly folded that crisp, oddly heavy $10 bill, slipped it into my pocket, and walked out. They thought they had humiliated me. What my arrogant father didn't know was that Grandpa wasn't broke, and the specific serial number on that bill was about to end him. The heavy oak doors of the conference room felt more like a trap than an exit. My name is Katie. I am 28 years old, and until today, I believed that family meant standing by the people who love you, even when the rest of the world turns its back. For 5 long years, I adjusted my entire life to care for my grandfather, moving into his cramped space, cooking his meals, and holding his hand through terrifying midnight hospital stays. Meanwhile, my father, Arthur, lived in his pristine bubble of corporate wealth, never once picking up the phone unless it was to ask about his eventual inheritance. When the reading finally commenced, the visual layout of the room mirrored the bitter truth perfectly. On one side sat my father and his siblings, radiating a smug, untouchable confidence, wrapped in designer coats and smelling of expensive cologne. On my side sat nothing but empty space and the memory of a man who had loved me. The attorney cleared his throat, announcing that Arthur would inherit with a weathered, rural property dubbed the junk house and a crisp $10 bill. The room instantly exploded with cruel amusement. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction, totally unaware that he and his siblings had illegally pressured the firm to alter the primary estate terms. I simply took the bill, ignored their jeers, and walked out into the rain. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled up to the property. Calling it a house was generous. It looked like a structure that had given up on itself decades ago. The wood was deeply weathered to a stark, charcoal gray, and wild ivy climbed aggressively up the rotting porch pillars, threatening to swallow the front door whole. It was easy to see why my father and his siblings called this place the junk house, without ever bothering to drive out and see it. To them, it was just an eyesore on a worthless patch of rural land. I stepped onto the creaking porch, half expecting the boards to give way beneath my boots. When I pushed the door open, a heavy wave of dust and stale air hit me, making me cough. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the grime-covered windows, my breath hitched for an entirely different reason. The exterior was a masterpiece of deception. The inside didn't contain piles of rotting trash or worthless debris. Instead, the main living area was meticulously organized. Stretching across the walls were beautiful, custom-built oak bookshelves, perfectly preserved and packed with rare, leather-bound first-edition novels. Hand-drawn structural blueprints and historical property maps were rolled neatly in protective brass cylinders, arranged by date. On the heavy mahogany tables sat beautifully cataloged antique compasses, maritime clocks, and old handwritten journals detailing land surveys from half a century ago. Grandpa hadn't been living in squalor. He had built a sanctuary. It clicked in my mind right then. He had deliberately left the outside looking like a total ruin to ensure my greedy father would never want to step foot inside. I sat down in Grandpa's old oak desk chair, the leather smooth and cool beneath my hands. The silence of the house enveloped me, a stark contrast to the mocking laughter that had filled the lawyer's office just hours ago. Pulling a single $10 bill from my pocket, I smoothed it out on the dusty desk surface. Holding it up against the dim light filtering through the window, I realized my initial instinct had been entirely right. The paper composition felt uniquely thick, noticeably heavier than any standard currency in circulation today, and the ink possessed a deep, raised texture that practically demanded closer inspection. I leaned in, my eyes tracking across the intricate green borders until they locked onto the serial number printed sharply across the front. It wasn't just a random sequence of numbers and letters. As I stared at the sequence, my gaze drifted down to the floorboards right beneath the heavy desk. Brushing away a layer of loose dust and an old, faded rug, my fingers brushed against cold metal. There, embedded seamlessly into the reinforced floor, was a heavy, brass-trimmed lockbox. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This box didn't feature a keyhole or a standard padlock. Instead, a specialized, old-fashioned mechanical rolling combination lock stared back at me, requiring an exact 8-character sequence of shifting letters and digits to open it. I looked back at the $10 bill resting on the desk, the unique serial number gleaming in the shadows. Grandpa hadn't left me a random token of pocket change to insult me. He had handed me the exact master code to whatever he was hiding beneath the floorboards. With trembling fingers, I knelt on the cold floorboards and began aligning the rolling dials of the lock with the exact characters of the serial number. With the final turn, a heavy, metallic click echoed through the empty room, and the lid popped open. I held my breath, expecting to see stacks of cash or gold. Instead, the box contained something far more valuable, a neat stack of certified bearer bonds, land deeds to prime tech corridor properties, and a thick, black leather ledger. I lifted the ledger, carefully opening its yellowed pages. The first section revealed the true extent of Grandpa's wealth. He had secretly transferred the vast majority of his millions into a private, ironclad trust solely under my name years ago. But as I flipped toward the back half of the ledger, the neat handwriting shifted into a detailed, devastating timeline. It contained bank routing numbers, falsified signatures, and printed corporate emails. My blood ran cold as the reality sank in. This wasn't just a financial record. It was a comprehensive criminal dossier against my father, Arthur. For nearly a decade, he had been systematically embezzling corporate funds, committing wire fraud, and engaging in severe elder financial abuse to strip Grandpa of his own company. Grandpa knew exactly what Arthur was doing, but his failing health prevented him from fighting back openly. He had systematically gathered the evidence, locked it away, and left me with the keys to completely destroy the man who had betrayed him. The upscale restaurant Arthur chose for our meeting was a monument to his unearned arrogance, all gleaming glass and hushed, wealthy chatter. He was already sitting at the corner table, swirling a glass of expensive wine, looking like a king who had successfully defended his throne. As I sat down across from him, he gave me a tightly rationed, patronizing smile, clearly expecting me to beg for a financial handout or complain about the crumbling state of the rural cottage. "Katie, I'm glad you're finally facing reality," he said, tapping a polished finger against his leather briefcase. "I brought the official property transfer deeds. Let's sign them quickly so you can move on with your life." I didn't say a single word. I simply looked him dead in the eye, keeping my expression entirely calm, and reached into my bag. Instead of signing his paperwork, I quietly slid 2 photocopies across the crisp white tablecloth directly toward him. The first page was a clear, enlarged copy of the $10 bill's unique serial number. The second page was a copy of the ledger's initial financial spreadsheet detailing his hidden corporate transfers. Arthur's smug smile instantly froze, and the healthy color began to rapidly drain from his face as his eyes scanned the text. The icy fear in his gaze was unmistakable. He instantly recognized the private routing numbers of the offshore shell accounts he had covertly used to hide the stolen millions from the board. Arthur leaned back, his chest heaving as a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. The master of corporate manipulation looked completely trapped, his hands trembling so violently he had to hide them beneath the table. He tried to speak, to muster up his usual booming, commanding voice, but it came out as a weak, pathetic stammer. Where did you get this, Katie?" he whispered, his eyes darting around the restaurant as if the authorities were already closing in on him. He knew exactly what these documents meant. The specific $10 bill he had mocked in the lawyer's office was the literal thread that pulled his entire criminal empire apart. The serial number didn't just unlock Grandpa's hidden box. It matched the exact security code of the private offshore accounts he used to conceal his illegal activities. If I handed this ledger over to the federal investigators, Arthur would be facing immediate charges of wire fraud, grand larceny, and severe corporate embezzlement. The arrogant businessman who had laughed at my poverty was now utterly broken, staring at his 28-year-old daughter with absolute terror in his eyes. I calmly leaned forward, letting the silence stretch until he couldn't take it anymore. I gave him my absolute terms. He would immediately resign from Grandpa's company, every single dollar he had stolen. He nodded rapidly, completely defeated, begging me not to call the police. 3 months later, the justice my grandfather meticulously planned was fully realized. I didn't tear down the old rural cottage. Instead, I used the vast resources of the recovered trust to completely restore it, turning the deceptive junk house into a beautiful, thriving historical estate. My father, Arthur, quietly resigned from the board, stripped of his stolen wealth and forced into a humbler life far away from the corporate spotlight, avoiding prison only because he complied with every single one of my demands. Grandpa's true legacy wasn't the millions, but the profound lesson that greed eventually consumes itself. Now, I'm incredibly curious about all of you who have stayed with me to listen to my story. If you found yourself standing in my exact shoes, would you have protected your own father to keep the family name clean, or would you have handed that criminal ledger straight over to the federal authorities? Let me know your honest thoughts from today so I can track exactly how far my grandfather's story has traveled across the world. Thank you so much for watching until the very end, and make sure to click on one of the 2 videos currently displayed on your screen to uncover even more unbelievable family